Human rescues baby Triceratops from quicksand. What happens next is incredible. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The sun hung high over the dense jungle canopy, its rays piercing through gaps in the trees and casting a golden glow over the forest floor. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of chirping insects and distant bird calls filled the atmosphere. Marcus, an experienced adventurer and wildlife researcher, wiped the sweat from his brow as he made his way through the dense undergrowth, machete in hand. His mission was unlike any other. Rumors of prehistoric creatures had surfaced in this remote corner of the world. Creatures that shouldn't exist in this time. Though skeptical at first, Marcus couldn't resist the call of discovery. He had trekked deep into the jungle for weeks, guided by tales from local villagers who spoke of massive footprints and strange roars in the night. The journey had been grueling, with treacherous terrain and relentless mosquitoes, but Marcus was driven by an insatiable curiosity. He had yet to find solid evidence of the creatures the villagers described, but his instincts told him he was close. As he pushed forward, the forest suddenly opened up into a small clearing, and what he saw made him freeze in his tracks. There, just a few feet away, was a young Triceratops. The creature was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It was small, no larger than a large dog, with a frill that framed its head like a crown and two tiny horns just beginning to grow. Its reddish-brown skin glistened in the sunlight, and its large, curious eyes blinked as it surveyed its surroundings. But something was wrong. The baby Triceratops was stuck in a patch of quicksand, its tiny legs flailing as it struggled to free itself. Panic was evident in its movements and its cries. A series of high-pitched, plaintive sounds cut through the stillness of the jungle. Marcus's heart raced. This was it, the proof he had been searching for. But there was no time to celebrate. The little creature was in trouble, and every second counted. Dropping his gear, Marcus approached cautiously, careful not to startle the animal. He could see the terror in its eyes, the way it strained against the grip of the quicksand. He knew he had to act fast but also carefully. The last thing he wanted was to scare the Triceratops into sinking deeper. "It's okay," Marcus murmured, his voice calm and soothing. "I'm here to help." The baby Triceratops let out another desperate cry as Marcus knelt at the edge of the quicksand. He extended a hand slowly, showing the creature that he meant no harm. Its flailing slowed slightly, as if it sensed his intentions. Marcus scanned the area, searching for anything that could help. He spotted a fallen branch nearby, long and sturdy enough to reach the trapped creature. Grabbing the branch, he slid it toward the Triceratops, hoping it would latch onto it with its tiny claws. "Come on, little one," he urged. "You can do it." The Triceratops seemed to understand. It reached out with one of its front legs, gripping the branch as best as it could. Marcus began to pull gently, careful not to apply too much force. The quicksand resisted, but Marcus didn't give up. He leaned back, using all his strength to tug the creature free. After what felt like an eternity, the Triceratops finally broke free from the quicksand. It stumbled onto solid ground, collapsing in exhaustion but otherwise unharmed. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He crouched next to the creature, his hand hovering over its side as he debated whether to touch it. The Triceratops looked up at him, its eyes wide and filled with gratitude. "You're okay now," Marcus said softly. "You're safe." The Triceratops didn't run away. Instead, it stayed close to Marcus, its small body trembling from the ordeal. Marcus took this as a sign of trust and slowly reached out, his hand brushing against its smooth, leathery skin. The creature didn't flinch. Instead, it let out a soft sound that almost resembled a purr. Marcus couldn't believe what was happening. Here he was, in the middle of the jungle, bonding with a living, breathing dinosaur. It was a moment that defied logic, a moment that felt like something out of a dream. He reached into his pack and pulled out a canteen of water, carefully pouring some into his cupped hand. The Triceratops sniffed at it before lapping up the water eagerly. Marcus chuckled. his heart swelling with affection for the little creature. "You must be hungry too," he said, looking around for something it might eat. He found a cluster of low-hanging leaves nearby and broke off a few branches. The Triceratops nibbled on them cautiously at first, then with more enthusiasm. As the creature ate, Marcus couldn't help but marvel at its resilience. Despite everything it had been through, it still had the strength to trust him, a stranger. It was a reminder of the incredible adaptability of life and of the responsibility he now bore. The bond between Marcus and the baby Triceratops deepened over the next few hours. The creature followed him as he moved through the jungle, its small legs working hard to keep up. Marcus couldn't bring himself to leave it behind, not when it was so vulnerable. He named the Triceratops Trixie, a name that seemed to suit its playful yet determined nature. Trixie seemed to respond to the name, letting out a happy chirp whenever Marcus called her. As night fell, Marcus set up camp in a small clearing, building a fire to keep predators at bay. Trixie curled up beside him, her body radiating warmth. Marcus couldn't help but smile as he watched her drift off to sleep, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a sense of peace. He had come to the jungle seeking discovery, but what he had found was far more profound. Trixie wasn't just evidence of prehistoric life. She was a reminder of the deep connections that could exist between humans and animals, even across millennia. The next morning, Marcus awoke to the sound of rustling leaves. He opened his eyes to see Trixie nosing through his pack, her curiosity leading her to inspect its contents. He laughed, sitting up and stretching. "Hungry already?" he teased, pulling out another handful of leaves for her. Trixie chirped in delight, munching on the greens with gusto. As they prepared to continue their journey, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The jungle was alive with movement and sound, but something about the atmosphere felt different. He tightened his grip on his machete, his senses on high alert. Suddenly, a loud roar echoed through the trees, sending a chill down Marcus's spine. Trixie froze, her small body trembling as the roar grew closer. Marcus's heart raced as he realized what it was. A predator. Marcus stood still, his heart pounding as the roar echoed through the jungle once more. The sound was deep and guttural, reverberating through the trees like a warning bell. Trixie pressed herself against his leg, her small body trembling with fear. Marcus instinctively placed a protective hand on her frill, his mind racing to figure out their next move. He scanned the surrounding area, searching for a place to hide. The dense jungle provided plenty of cover, but he knew they would need to move quickly. Whatever had made that sound was large, powerful, and undoubtedly dangerous. "Stay close, Trixie," Marcus whispered, his voice low but steady. He scooped up his gear, slinging his pack over his shoulder and gripping his machete tightly. Trixie let out a small, anxious chirp but stayed by his side as they began to move. The roar came again, louder this time, and Marcus felt the ground vibrate beneath his feet. Whatever was approaching was getting closer, and it was massive. Marcus pushed through the thick undergrowth, his senses on high alert. He could hear the rustling of leaves and the snapping of branches as the creature moved through the jungle. Suddenly, the trees ahead of them parted, and a massive figure emerged. Marcus froze, his breath catching in his throat. Standing before them was a large carnivorous dinosaur, its sharp teeth glinting in the dappled sunlight. Its yellow eyes locked onto them, and it let out a low growl that sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. It was a predator unlike any he had ever seen, its powerful legs and razor-sharp claws making it a formidable hunter. Marcus knew there was no way he could fight it. His only chance was to escape. "Run, Trixie!" Marcus shouted, his voice breaking the tension. He pushed the young Triceratops ahead of him, urging her to move as fast as she could. Trixie hesitated for a moment, her eyes wide with fear, but then she bolted, her small legs carrying her through the jungle with surprising speed. Marcus followed close behind, his heart racing as the predator let out another roar and began to give chase. The jungle became a blur as he and Trixie weaved through the trees, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The sound of the predator's heavy footsteps was deafening, and Marcus could feel its presence closing in on them. Just when he thought they wouldn't make it, Marcus spotted a narrow crevice in the rocky terrain ahead. It was just wide enough for him and Trixie to squeeze through, but too small for the predator to follow. Without hesitation, Marcus steered Trixie toward the opening, urging her inside. "Go, go, go!" he yelled, his voice filled with urgency. Trixie scrambled into the crevice, her small body fitting easily between the rocks. Marcus followed, his heart pounding as he wedged himself into the narrow space. The predator reached the opening just as Marcus disappeared inside, its massive jaws snapping shut inches from his foot. For a moment, everything was silent except for the sound of Marcus's ragged breathing. He pressed his back against the cool stone, his machete still clutched tightly in his hand. Trixie huddled beside him, her eyes wide with fear but her trust in Marcus unwavering. The predator growled, pacing back and forth outside the crevice. It clawed at the rocks, trying to reach them, but the narrow opening kept them just out of its grasp. Marcus could feel the tension in the air, the primal instinct to survive coursing through his veins. "We're okay," he whispered to Trixie, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "We're safe for now." Hours passed before the predator finally gave up, letting out a frustrated roar before stomping off into the jungle. Marcus waited until he was certain it was gone before crawling out of the crevice, his body stiff from being wedged in such a tight space. He helped Trixie out, her small legs stumbling slightly as she regained her footing. Marcus looked around, his eyes scanning the jungle for any signs of danger. The area was quiet now, the sounds of the predator replaced by the familiar hum of the forest. He let out a sigh of relief, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in hours. "That was too close," he muttered, glancing down at Trixie. "We need to find a safer place to rest." Trixie let out a soft chirp, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and trust. Marcus couldn't help but smile, his bond with the young Triceratops growing stronger with each passing moment. As they continued their journey, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter with the predator was only the beginning. The jungle was full of dangers, and he would need to stay vigilant if they were going to survive. But he also felt a renewed sense of determination. He had saved Trixie once, and he would do it again if he had to. The sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the jungle. Marcus found a small clearing near a stream where they could rest for the night. He built a fire to keep predators at bay and set up a makeshift shelter using branches and leaves. Trixie curled up beside him, her small body radiating warmth. As the fire crackled and the stars appeared overhead, Marcus reflected on the day's events. He had come to the jungle searching for answers, but what he had found was something far more profound. Trixie wasn't just a discovery. She was a reminder of the resilience of life and the power of connection. "You're something special, Trixie," Marcus said softly, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and affection. "I don't know what brought you into my life, but I'm glad you're here." Trixie let out a contented chirp, her eyes closing as she drifted off to sleep. Marcus watched her for a moment, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain: he would do whatever it took to protect her. The next morning, Marcus awoke to the sound of birdsong and the gentle rustling of leaves. The jungle was alive with activity, the start of a new day bringing with it a sense of hope. Trixie was already awake, nosing through the undergrowth in search of food. Marcus stretched, his muscles still sore from the previous day's ordeal. He gathered his gear and prepared to continue their journey, his mind focused on finding a safe place for Trixie to thrive. The jungle was vast and unpredictable, but Marcus was determined to see his mission through. As they walked, Marcus couldn't help but marvel at Trixie's resilience. Despite everything she had been through, she remained curious and playful, her small body full of energy. It was a testament to the strength of life, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, there was always a reason to keep going. "You're a fighter, Trixie," Marcus said with a smile, "and I'm going to make sure you have the chance to grow into the amazing creature you're meant to be." The journey through the jungle continued with an almost rhythmic flow of survival and discovery. Marcus and Trixie had grown into a team, each relying on the other in ways neither had expected. Trixie's instincts as a young dinosaur often alerted Marcus to hidden dangers, while Marcus's experience and quick thinking ensured they navigated the treacherous landscape safely. As the morning sun rose higher in the sky, Marcus began to notice a subtle change in their surroundings. The dense foliage of the jungle gave way to patches of open grassland, dotted with towering rock formations. The air felt cooler here, and the sounds of the jungle were replaced by the distant call of unfamiliar creatures. Trixie seemed to sense the change as well. She sniffed the air, her frill flaring slightly as she let out a soft chirp. Marcus knelt beside her, scanning the area for any signs of danger. "What is it, girl?" he asked, his voice low. "Do you sense something?" Trixie's eyes darted toward a cluster of rocks in the distance. Marcus followed her gaze, his heart skipping a beat when he saw movement. A flash of reddish-brown against the gray stone. He squinted, trying to make out the figure, and his breath caught in his throat when he realized what he was seeing. It was another Triceratops. The larger Triceratops emerged from behind the rocks, its imposing figure a stark contrast to Trixie's small size. Its horns were fully grown, curving elegantly from its head, and its frill was adorned with intricate patterns that shimmered in the sunlight. The creature moved with a sense of confidence, its powerful legs carrying it effortlessly across the grassland. Trixie let out an excited chirp, her tiny legs carrying her forward before Marcus could stop her. He watched in awe as she approached the larger Triceratops, her movements cautious but eager. The adult Triceratops lowered its massive head, sniffing at Trixie curiously before letting out a low rumble. Marcus stayed back, his hand resting on his machete in case things took a dangerous turn. But to his relief, the larger Triceratops seemed to accept Trixie, nudging her gently with its snout. Trixie responded with a happy chirp, her tail wagging like an overexcited puppy. "It's her family," Marcus whispered to himself, a smile spreading across his face. She found her family. For a moment, Marcus considered leaving Trixie with the adult Triceratops. It seemed like the safest option. She would be with her own kind, protected by a creature much stronger than he could ever hope to be. But as he watched the two dinosaurs interact, a pang of hesitation struck his chest. Trixie had grown to trust him, to rely on him, and the thought of parting ways felt like tearing away a piece of his own soul. He stepped forward cautiously, his movements slow and deliberate. The adult Triceratops raised its head, its yellow eyes locking onto him. Marcus stopped in his tracks, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The Triceratops let out a low rumble, its gaze never leaving Marcus. Trixie turned to look at him, her eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and reassurance. She chirped softly, as if trying to bridge the gap between her newfound family and the human who had saved her. Marcus took another step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The adult Triceratops didn't move, but its rumbling grew louder, a warning that it was ready to defend itself if necessary. Marcus stopped again, lowering his hands. "I just want to make sure she's safe," he said, his voice steady. "She's important to me." The standoff lasted for what felt like an eternity, but eventually, the adult Triceratops lowered its head, returning its attention to Trixie. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, relief washing over him like a wave. He took a step back, giving the two dinosaurs their space. Trixie glanced at him, her chirp carrying a note of reassurance, as if to say she was in good hands. Marcus nodded, his heart heavy but filled with a sense of peace. "You'll be okay," he said, his voice tinged with emotion. "You've got someone to look after you now." As Marcus turned to leave, a sudden rustling in the grass caught his attention. He spun around, his machete at the ready, just in time to see a pack of small, agile predators emerge from the undergrowth. They were raptors, their sleek bodies built for speed and precision, and their eyes glinted with predatory intent. The adult Triceratops let out a deafening roar, its body shifting into a defensive stance as the raptors circled. Trixie chirped in alarm, pressing herself against the larger dinosaur for protection. Marcus's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he rushed forward, positioning himself between the raptors and the two triceratops. He brandished his machete, shouting loudly in an attempt to intimidate the predators. "Stay back!" he yelled, his voice filled with determination. The raptors hesitated for a moment, their sharp eyes assessing the unexpected threat. But their hunger outweighed their caution, and they lunged forward as a pack, their razor-sharp claws aimed at their prey. What followed was a blur of chaos and adrenaline. Marcus swung his machete with all his strength, keeping the raptors at bay while the adult triceratops charged at them, its horns a formidable weapon. Trixie stayed close to the larger dinosaur, her small body trembling as she watched the battle unfold. One of the raptors managed to slip past Marcus, its sharp teeth snapping dangerously close to his leg. He kicked it away, his heart pounding as he realized just how outnumbered they were. But he refused to give up. He had promised to protect Trixie, and he wasn't about to break that promise. The fight felt like it lasted forever, but eventually the raptors began to retreat, their injuries and the combined strength of Marcus and the triceratops proving too much for them. They disappeared into the jungle, their growls fading into the distance. Marcus collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. The adult triceratops stood nearby, its body battered but unharmed. Trixie let out a happy chirp, nuzzling against Marcus as if to thank him for his bravery. "You're welcome," Marcus said with a weak smile, his hand resting on Trixie's frill. "But next time, let's avoid the raptors. Okay?" The adult triceratops let out a low rumble, its gaze meeting Marcus's. There was something in its eyes, an unspoken understanding, a recognition of the bond he shared with Trixie. It stepped forward, lowering its head slightly in what Marcus could only interpret as a gesture of gratitude. "You're welcome too," Marcus said softly, his voice filled with awe. As the sun began to set, casting the grassland in a warm golden light, Marcus knew it was time to make a decision. He couldn't stay in the jungle forever, but he also couldn't take Trixie with him. She belonged here in the wild with her own kind. He knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her frill. "This is where you're meant to be, Trixie," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "You've got a family now, and they'll take care of you." Trixie chirped softly, her eyes filled with a mixture of understanding and sadness. Marcus pulled her into a gentle hug, his heart aching at the thought of saying goodbye. "You've got this," he whispered. "You're stronger than you know." The golden hues of the setting sun bathed the landscape in a surreal glow, casting long shadows over the grassland. Marcus lingered near the edge of the clearing, his heart torn between staying and leaving. Trixie stood beside the larger triceratops, her small figure dwarfed by the massive creature. Despite her newfound safety, Trixie continued to glance back at Marcus, her chirps carrying a note of longing that tugged at his heart. The bond they had formed over the past few days was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. Trixie wasn't just a prehistoric creature. She was a friend, a companion, and a reminder of the extraordinary connection that could exist between two very different beings. The thought of leaving her behind filled him with a deep sense of loss, but he knew it was the right thing to do. "This is your home now, Trixie," Marcus said softly, his voice barely audible over the rustling of the grass. "You'll be safe here." Trixie let out a soft chirp, her eyes reflecting a mixture of understanding and sadness. Marcus took a deep breath, steeling himself for what came next. He turned to leave, each step feeling heavier than the last. But before he could take more than a few steps, a sound stopped him in his tracks. It was a low, guttural growl, emanating from the shadows beyond the clearing. Marcus froze, his senses immediately on high alert. He turned back toward the triceratops, his eyes scanning the area for the source of the sound. The larger triceratops had already picked up on the danger. Its frill flared, and it let out a warning roar that echoed across the grassland. Trixie pressed herself against the adult's side, her small body trembling with fear. From the shadows, a massive predator emerged, a creature that dwarfed even the adult triceratops. Its muscular frame was covered in scarred, weathered scales, and its yellow eyes gleamed with predatory intent. Marcus's breath caught in his throat as he realized what he was looking at. It was a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The T-Rex let out a deafening roar, the sheer force of the sound shaking the ground beneath Marcus's feet. It took a step forward, its massive claws digging into the earth as it fixed its gaze on the Triceratops. The larger Triceratops responded with a defiant bellow, lowering its head and preparing to defend itself and Trixie. Marcus's mind raced. The T-Rex was a force of nature, a predator unlike anything he had ever encountered. He knew the adult Triceratops was powerful, but he also knew that a battle between the two giants could have devastating consequences. He had to do something. Without thinking, Marcus grabbed a nearby branch and lit the end with the fire he had started earlier. The makeshift torch flared to life, casting flickering light across the clearing. He ran toward the T-Rex, shouting and waving the torch in an attempt to distract it. "Over here!" he yelled, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "Come and get me, you overgrown lizard!" The T-Rex turned its massive head toward Marcus, its yellow eyes narrowing as it assessed the new threat. It let out a low growl, its attention momentarily diverted from the Triceratops. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as he held the torch aloft, its flames flickering in the breeze. The larger Triceratops took advantage of the distraction, positioning itself between the T-Rex and Trixie. It let out another defiant roar, its horns gleaming in the fading sunlight. Trixie chirped nervously, her small body pressed against the adult's side. Marcus continued to shout and wave the torch, his every movement calculated to keep the T-Rex's focus on him. The predator took a step forward, its massive jaws parting to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. Marcus's grip on the torch tightened as he prepared for the worst. But just as the T-Rex lunged toward him, the larger Triceratops charged. Its powerful legs propelled it forward, its horns aimed directly at the predator's side. The impact was thunderous, the force of the collision sending the T-Rex staggering backward. Marcus took the opportunity to retreat, his heart racing as he watched the two giants clash. The T-Rex roared in fury, its massive tail lashing out and narrowly missing the Triceratops. The two creatures circled each other, their every movement a display of raw power and primal instinct. Trixie watched from the sidelines, her chirps filled with worry. Marcus knelt beside her, his hand resting on her frill in a gesture of reassurance. "It's going to be okay," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding before them. "We're going to get through this." The battle raged on, the sounds of roaring and bellowing filling the air. The Triceratops fought with a determination that left Marcus in awe, its horns striking with precision and strength. The T-Rex was relentless, its powerful jaws snapping dangerously close to its opponent. Marcus knew he couldn't just stand by and watch. He grabbed another branch and lit it with the torch, creating a second makeshift weapon. He ran toward the T-Rex, hurling the burning branch at its side. The predator let out a roar of pain as the flames singed its scales, momentarily distracting it from the fight. The Triceratops seized the opportunity, delivering a powerful blow that sent the T-Rex reeling. The predator stumbled, its massive frame crashing to the ground with a thunderous impact. It let out a final, frustrated roar before retreating into the shadows, its injured body disappearing into the jungle. Silence fell over the clearing, the only sounds the crackling of the torch and the heavy breathing of the Triceratops. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. The larger Triceratops stood tall, its frill flaring as it let out a triumphant bellow. Trixie chirped excitedly, her small legs carrying her to Marcus's side. She nuzzled against him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You did it," Marcus said softly, his voice filled with awe. "You both did it." The adult Triceratops turned to look at Marcus, its gaze carrying a sense of recognition. It stepped closer, lowering its massive head in what Marcus could only interpret as a gesture of respect. Marcus reached out hesitantly, his hand brushing against its rough skin. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for protecting her. As the night wore on, Marcus and the Triceratopses remained in the clearing, their bond forged in the heat of battle. The adult Triceratops lay down beside Trixie, its massive body a shield against any further threats. Marcus sat nearby, his back against a rock, the events of the day replaying in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had been part of something extraordinary, something that transcended time and species. The jungle had tested him in ways he never could have imagined, but it had also given him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. As he drifted off to sleep, his thoughts turned to the future. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. He would do whatever it took to protect the incredible creatures he had come to care for. Morning arrived with a gentle breeze and the sound of birdsong filling the air. The clearing, once a battlefield, now seemed peaceful and serene under the soft glow of the rising sun. Marcus woke to find Trixie nuzzled against his side, her tiny frame radiating warmth. The larger Triceratops stood nearby, its imposing figure a silent sentinel guarding them through the night. Marcus stretched, his muscles sore but his spirit renewed. He had survived a harrowing ordeal, and more importantly, he had kept Trixie safe. As he looked at the young dinosaur, now playfully batting at a nearby branch, he felt an overwhelming sense of pride and responsibility. "Time to move," he said softly, his voice carrying a note of determination. "We've got a lot of ground to cover." The adult Triceratops watched as Marcus prepared to leave, its yellow eyes filled with an unspoken understanding. Trixie let out a series of excited chirps, her tail wagging as she trotted after Marcus. He glanced back at the larger dinosaur, nodding in gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Take care of yourself." As Marcus and Trixie ventured deeper into the jungle, the landscape began to change once again. The dense foliage gave way to a series of rocky cliffs, their jagged edges casting long shadows over the terrain. The air grew cooler, and the sound of rushing water hinted at a nearby river. Trixie, ever curious, darted ahead, her small legs navigating the uneven ground with surprising agility. Marcus followed closely, his machete at the ready. He had learned to trust Trixie's instincts. Her keen senses often alerted him to danger long before he could detect it himself. They reached the river by midday, its crystal-clear waters glistening under the sun. Marcus knelt at the edge, scooping up water with his hands to quench his thirst. Trixie waded into the shallows, her small frame rippling with delight as she splashed and chirped. For a brief moment, Marcus allowed himself to relax. The river seemed like a haven, a place untouched by the dangers of the jungle. But as he watched Trixie play, a sense of unease began to creep over him. The river was too quiet. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. He stood, his eyes scanning the surrounding area for any signs of movement. "Trixie," he called softly, his voice tinged with caution. "Stay close." Trixie paused, her playful chirps fading as she picked up on Marcus's tension. She moved toward him, her small body pressed against his leg as she looked around nervously. The silence was broken by a sudden splash upstream. Marcus turned toward the sound, his hand tightening around the hilt of his machete. A ripple moved across the water, heading straight toward them. The ripple grew larger, the water churning as something massive approached. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped in front of Trixie, his body tense and ready for whatever was coming. A massive head broke the surface, its eyes glinting with intelligence and predatory focus. It was a crocodilian-like creature, its powerful jaws lined with razor-sharp teeth. Marcus recognized it as a prehistoric predator, a Sarcosuchus, often referred to as a supercroc. The Sarcosuchus let out a deep, guttural growl, its massive body propelling it closer to the riverbank. Marcus knew they had no chance of outrunning it in the open. He had to think fast. "Trixie, run!" he shouted, his voice echoing across the river. He pushed her toward the safety of the jungle, his heart aching as she hesitated, her chirps filled with confusion and fear. "Go!" he yelled again, his tone leaving no room for argument. Trixie finally obeyed, her small legs carrying her into the undergrowth. Marcus turned his attention back to the Sarcosuchus, which was now mere feet away. He raised his machete, his mind racing for a plan. The creature lunged, its massive jaws snapping shut where Marcus had stood just moments before. He dodged to the side, his movements fueled by adrenaline. He swung the machete at the Sarcosuchus, the blade striking its thick hide with little effect. The predator growled, its tail lashing out and knocking Marcus off his feet. He hit the ground hard, the impact forcing the air from his lungs. The Sarcosuchus advanced, its jaws opening wide for the kill. Marcus scrambled to his feet, grabbing a nearby rock and hurling it at the creature's head. The impact stunned it momentarily, giving him just enough time to dive into the river. The cold water enveloped him, his limbs moving frantically as he swam to the opposite bank. The Sarcosuchus roared in frustration, its massive body churning the water as it pursued him. Marcus reached the far side, pulling himself onto the bank just as the predator lunged. He rolled out of the way, the creature's jaws snapping shut on empty air. Marcus spotted a fallen tree nearby, its jagged branches forming a natural barrier. He scrambled toward it, using the branches to create distance between himself and the Sarcosuchus. The predator growled, its frustration evident as it struggled to navigate the obstacle. For a moment, Marcus thought he was safe, but then he heard a sound that froze him in his tracks. A high-pitched chirp, coming from the jungle behind him. "Trixie," he whispered, his heart sinking. He turned to see Trixie standing at the edge of the river, her small frame trembling as she watched the Sarcosuchus. Her eyes were wide with fear, but her chirps carried a note of determination. She wasn't going to leave Marcus behind. "No," Marcus said, his voice desperate. "Stay back." But Trixie didn't move. Instead, she let out a loud chirp, her frill flaring as she charged toward the Sarcosuchus. Marcus's heart leapt into his throat as he watched the young dinosaur face off against the massive predator. The Sarcosuchus turned its attention to Trixie, its jaws snapping menacingly. Marcus seized the opportunity, grabbing a sturdy branch and lighting it with his torch. He ran toward the predator, shouting at the top of his lungs. "Over here, you oversized lizard," he yelled, waving the burning branch. The Sarcosuchus hesitated, its predatory instincts torn between Marcus and Trixie. Marcus didn't give it a chance to decide. He hurled the burning branch at its head, the flames catching on its scales. The creature roared in pain, thrashing wildly as it retreated into the water. Marcus scooped up Trixie, his arms wrapping protectively around her as he ran toward the jungle. He didn't stop until the sounds of the river were far behind them, his lungs burning and his muscles screaming in protest. When he finally stopped, he collapsed to the ground, his arms still cradling Trixie. She let out a soft chirp, nuzzling against him as if to reassure him that she was okay. "You're crazy, you know that?" Marcus said, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and affection. "But I'm glad you're on my side," Trixie chirped again, her eyes shining with trust and gratitude. Marcus couldn't help but smile, his bond with the young dinosaur stronger than ever. He knew their journey was far from over, but for the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the jungle in shades of orange and gold, Marcus made a silent vow. He would protect Trixie at all costs, no matter what dangers lay ahead. Together, they would face whatever the jungle had in store, and together they would survive.